Hello, everyone, and welcome to chapter 34 of this Flutter course. In the previous chapters, we've been talking quite a bit about how we can create notes and how we can delete them. So we've been working quite a bit with some generic dialogues that we've also developed in order to be able to handle error dialogues and also the logout dialogue, for instance, and also the delete dialogue. So there's been quite a lot of work done on that side, but we haven't really talked at all about how the user can tap on or click on their existing notes in order to be able to update that, for instance, update that particular note. So that's what we're going to take care of in this chapter. So if we now start looking at the code that we've written, you will see that we've called the view that actually creates a note the new note view. However, we're not going to go and create a whole new view that looks exactly the same as this new note view, just so that we can update existing notes. So the goal of this chapter is to reuse this view so that we can just use the exact same view, but when the user taps on a note in the note list, we're going to pass the tapped note to this existing view. All right, so that's what we're going to take care of in this chapter. Let me do a little bit of a shuffling around here so you'll see the screen better. I'm going to bring up Visual Studio Code as usual here. I have SCRCPY who is taking care of this Android screen. And we can then have a look at the first task that we have to do. As you can see in the cache, it says we have to rename the new note view Dart to create update note view. All right, so let's take care of that. I'm going to close all the tabs in here. And let's go and say Command P in Visual Studio Code, or maybe in Android Studio is another command that you have to execute in order to bring up the list of files. I don't really know the command in Android Studio, but if you're not comfortable with any of those, you can just go to this new note view right here, and we are going to rename it. So let's just do that now. So I'm just going to call as a caption indicates create update note view. Okay, create update note view, like that. If the updating, I mean, if your editor is intelligent enough and it has some like refactoring features built in, then you don't have to do anything special for this command to work. But you can see in here, for instance, now we've changed this file name to create updates notes view, but we haven't really changed, for instance, the class name. So if I go here, this thing is still called new note view. All right. So let's go in there and perhaps change that as well. Let me go to my notes. Let's see, create update note view. And we're going to go actually and rename this new note view as well. So let's go ahead and do some refactoring in here. So I'm just going to say refactor. And let's see, do we have any refactoring features here? We have rename symbols. So maybe let's use that. And I'm going to call it create update note view. All right. Let's see if it's successfully going to be able to rename this for me. So I can see it renamed the class for me, and it also renamed the state class, which is exactly what I needed. So if I now save this, we should have some problems. Excuse me. But I can see Visual Studio Code was intelligent enough actually to rename the main.dart reference to this route as well. Remember, when we created this what did we call it actually before? It was called new note view. That note view was new note view was actually being used inside our routes in the main function of our application inside main.dart. Now that we've renamed that to create update note view, both the class name, the stateful widget, and its state, then that new name should be used in main.dart. So if you're using Vim or any other code editor, like if you're using Sublime may not have this refactoring feature that it can actually go and rename where you've used that symbol. So you may need to do that by hand. So you may actually get some errors in your main.dart file. But if you get those errors, don't worry about it. At least you know what the problem is. Okay, so you can go and fix it yourself. All right, so we've done that. Now what we need to do is I'm actually going to press Command S here and Command S in here just to make sure everything's saved. And as the caption indicates, remember, we also have our routes inside constants. So you can see our route is still called new note route. Okay, so I'm gonna rename this now, and I suggest that you do the same thing too. Let's just say rename, and let's rename that to, as the caption indicates, create or update node route. Okay, so create or update node route, just like that. And as you can see, again, Visual Studio Code helped us quite a lot now. It went and updated this as well. You see, right? And something also happened in the notes view as well, I can see. And that's because you see the where we actually press the plus button in here to create a new note. That was also using the previously named new note route, but now it's updated to create or update note route. So all I'm trying to say in here, you need to rename that route so that it becomes create or update new node route. And depending on your editor, it may be smart enough to have some refactoring features. If it's like Visual Studio Code, then you're good to go. Just rename it. But if it's not, you may have to do that by hand. So just go ahead and rename where you refactor in your code where you're using that route to use the new name. Okay. All right. So let's have a look at this dilemma now. You see, in our notes view, when we create a new note, we just say navigator of context push named. All right. Now, the goal here is when we create this notes list view, we're going to allow the users, you see at the moment we have on delete node, but we're also going to have a parameter called on tap. We're going to develop that soon. But the dilemma here is that when you then say on tap, we need to also go to this view into this route that we have create or update node route. But we have to pass an argument to that route. An argument, just as it is for a parameter of a function or an argument to a function, is like data that you pass to that route. And you say, hey, I'm initializing this route, but I'm passing some data to it. So then that route can then in turn reactively that route can then react to that and go and read that argument and say, oh, was I pass an argument? Yes, then I'm going to do this. Was I not pass an argument? Then I'm going to do something else. In this case, if you pass a note to our create or update note route, then it's going to say, oh, I have an existing note. I'm just going to populate myself and my contents with that note, and I'm not going to create a new note. Remember, at the moment, our create update note view, we have this function set up in here that says create a new node. We're going to fix that soon. Okay. But remember that at the moment, when you go into that view, by default, it's creating a new node. And we're going to change that so that we're going to rename that and saying like create or get node or something like that. Soon you'll see. But in that function, then we're going to say, where we pass an argument, where we pass an existing node. If yes, we don't have to create a new node. If no, we have to create one. Okay. So the way arguments work then is if you have a look at our notes view where we're using push named, there is a parameter in here called arguments. And as you can see at the moment, it is just an optional object, meaning that, well, it can be nil or null. We're not leveraging that at the moment, but we are gonna soon. So at the call side where you're creating a route and pushing it to the navigation stack, you can pass your argument using that arguments parameter. Okay. And at the receiving side, in this case, are, let's see, create or update nodes view here. In here, uh, you can read then your argument. Let's see, let's go to some place that does make sense. Let's say in here. Okay, you can read that argument calling. Now you don't have to type as I'm typing. I'm just demonstrating something to you. Okay, and we can use model route, and we say of this context, and then you can say settings dot arguments. Then that's where you basically get access to your arguments through your modal route. So now you know how to pass arguments, and you know also how to receive them. All right. So let's go to the next point. You see, we may need to somewhere also in the future receive an argument inside our any of our widgets. And that argument can be any type that you specify. For instance, you can pass an integer from one screen to the other, or you can pass a string, or you can pass an array, or in our case, you can pass a database node. So as you could see in this code, let's go in here, settings. What's this optional? Yes, settings. and then arguments. You see, at the moment, this guy is an object, so it doesn't really know what it is. But it'd be really good if we could create a function somehow that allows us just to say, for instance, context get object of type T, something like that. So we could just say, given a build context, we want to extract an argument of any type from it if that argument exists, okay? And then we're going to use it in our code in here, and to and we get our build context and then grab our nodes out of it. So it's what we're going to do is like create a generic way of extracting arguments from our build context, and that's exactly what we're going to do now. Okay, so to do that, we're going to create an extension on build context, and that extension is going to be called get argument. And as I've indicated in the as I've indicated here in the caption at the bottom of the screen, you can see that we are going to create a new file under lib utilities generics and a file called gets arguments. So you can see we have utilities at the moment here, and that utilities, well, let me just fold everything in here so it's not so scary to look at. You can see utilities at the moment has a folder called dialogues under it, but what we want to create is a folder called generics and then a file under that called gets arguments. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that right now. So I'm going to go to utilities. Where to go? Utilities, dialogues. Okay, so I'm just going to right click on utilities and say new file, and I'm going to say generics, generics, and get arguments dart. Now in here, what we need is to just start writing our extension. So I'm just going to say extension, get argument on build context. Okay. Now, as I typed build context, Visual Studio Code was smart enough to import material. If you're using Sublime or any other text editor, it may not be intelligent enough to do that for you. It may not have like the extension to work with Dart and Flutter, kind of. So you may have to import material yourself. But remember, we also only need build context and modal route from entire material package in here. So it would make a lot more sense if we just said show build context and modal route. Right? So we're not going to use more from the material package than those two. All right, so let's go ahead and create this function. So we're saying that we are going to optionally return a value of type T. That means any type that you ask us to. And we're going to call this function get argument. Okay. And get argument itself takes T. All right. So in here, what we're going to say is going to say modal route is modal route of our build context, or this, because you see we are creating an extension on build context, and this identifier in here refers to the current build context on which the get argument function is actually invoked. So if you're not familiar with extensions, I've talked about them before. I think it was part of also the Dart introduction in the beginning, absolute beginning of this course. So you may want to go back to that in order to understand how extensions actually work. Okay, so remember modal route in here, if you look at it, it can be an optional in here, you see. So what we need to do is to guard ourselves against that. So we just say if modal route is not null, and otherwise we're just going to return null. We're saying that if we can't get the modal route, then we can't extract any argument from it. Okay, so let's get all the arguments from our modal route now. So we're going to say args is modal route settings dot arguments. Okay, and then remember args is also now an object as it was on the call site. The call site may skip over passing an argument to us, and in that case we're not going to get any arguments, which means args is going to be null in here. Okay, so let's just guard ourselves against that. So we say if args is not null and args is of this given type, then we're going to return args. Okay, args as T. Okay, so what we're saying in here is that if we could grab any arguments from our modal route settings arguments, and if that argument is of the type that you are asking this function to extract, then we're going to give it back to you. Otherwise, we're just going to fall through to line number 12 in here and just return and null. All right. Now I'm going to save this file. Okay, that was that part. Now, what we need is, let me bring up the caption so you see what we have to do. So let's now go to our view, which we called create. Actually, it's easy now that we have a lot of files in our project. It's actually easier to navigate if we just do Command P in Visual Studio Code, for instance, to jump to a specific file. So in that file, it is now called create update node view. So let's go there. And as the caption indicates, our create node in here, let's have a look and see if we can find that function. Create new node here, you see? So what we need to do is we just need to rename that create new nodes to, as the caption indicate, create or get existing node. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to say create or get existing node. And again, Visual Studio Code is smart enough to rename where I'm actually using that function as well. You can see in here, okay? So you may otherwise, if you're not using Visual Studio Code or if you're not using the refactoring features of your favorite editor, you may have to rename that call site as well. So I don't think I have to mention this again. I think I've now mentioned it 3 times. So just so you know, if you're renaming something, just make sure that all the call sites are also updated, okay? All right, so now that we've done that, we actually need to grab the existing nodes if it is already there. Okay, so so let's do that. You can see it says in create or get existing node gets node argument if any. All right, so let's then in here say if our widget, like the widget that actually called us, created us, has passed us an argument of type database node, then we're going to get that. Okay, so let's just call it widget node is. We need now a build context because remember our extension was created on build context. However, this function at the moment has no build context. So let's go ahead and pass a build context in here. Okay. So let's then go into the call site and pass the build context in here, call context, which is passed to us in the build function. All right. So trusting that you've done that, we're now going to go and say context get. And you see, now we need our get argument function in here. But as I type, nothing appears here. And that's because we don't have an import. So I can see if I just type get argument and ask Visual Studio Code to see if it can solve that problem for me. It's saying that, oh, there is a get arguments.dart file, which has that function. Do you want me to import it? So I'm just going to say, yes, please. Otherwise, if you're not doing this, you may have to import your get arguments.dart file by hand. All right. So now I'm just saying get arguments. And remember, get arguments function in itself has no parameters. So how do you call this function? Okay. How do you tell it to extract a T of like database node? Well, that's very easy. You just put this less than sign and greater than sign like that. And then you type the type of object that you want to extract. So we just say database node. All right. And now that we did that, remember get arguments returns an optional object of that type. And in this case, our database node is then an optional database node. All right, meaning that you either have a node so that the user has tapped on an existing node and came here, or you don't, meaning that the user tapped on the plus button and came here. Okay. So then we say if the widget node is not null, meaning that we're updating an existing node so that the user has tapped on an existing node and ended up on the screen. Then what we're going to do, we're going to save that inside our node private variable here. I think we set it up somewhere around here, you see? So we're going to say our node is the widget node, okay? And in this case, what we also need to do, we need to make sure that the text field inside on our screen, I can show you here. So if you go here, this text field, it should be pre-populated with that existing node's text. And the way we can do that, I mean, we don't have direct access to our text field, but what we do have is this text controller, which we set up in here, text controller. Okay, so let's go and set that text controller's text. So I'm just going to say text controller dot text is equal to widget note dot text. And then we're just going to return the widget note. So the notes that we could extract. Okay. Otherwise, what we're doing in here, we're saying existing node. So the logic is going to stay the same, the rest. So if we could extract a node from the passing widget or the caller widget, then we set that as our node, set the text, and then just return the widget node. Otherwise, we continue exactly as we did before. Okay. So let's see in here what we're also doing. Existing node, we're just returning in, but I can also see that upon doing a create node in here, we're not setting that node. So what we need to do in here, let's just say final new node, okay? And then we store that node. We say node is new node, and then we just say return new node. So in here, we're also saving our nodes, okay? So that's really good. So we actually working with an existing nodes, all right? Okay, so I'm actually not sure how this has worked before. This may have been a bug in the previous sections in that we didn't actually store the node in this node private variable. So maybe we had that bug from before. I can't be completely sure about that. So I'm just gonna press back in here. But if you had that bug as well, if you were like returning just an await of node service create node and you weren't saving that, I'm not sure how these functions were actually working, because I personally, oh, I can see that we were setting it in here. So we may not have to do that anymore. So let's then go ahead. And I mean, this was quite smart, but it wasn't that that good idea that the widgets build function was changing like a core part of this widget. So let's remove that now, okay? That's how it was working. So that's the reason it was working, but it shouldn't work like that, all right? Okay, let's move to the next section now. You see, if we go back to this part in here, if I press the delete button, do you remember this? We developed this in one of the previous chapters of this course. We made sure that we have a callback, and that callback was defined. Let's go in our notes list view. I'm actually going to do it like this, notes list view. Do you remember this callback? It's called delete note callback. It was just a function that returned nothing and accepted a note. And this way we could tell the notes view that, hey, the user wants to delete a note. Do it. Delete that now. And that was being called upon the user pressing the yes button. Remember, it's this view that is actually showing the delete dialog. All right. But if you look at that, but if you look at this delete note callback, what is it actually a callback of? Is a callback of a note. All right. So it has nothing really to do with delete. It's just called delete note callback. All right. Can we utilize this also to tell somehow when any of these notes is tapped? Can we utilize the exact same function to tell the notes list view, to tell the notes view that, hey, the user tapped on a note? Well, of course we could do that because it has no return value and it just accepts a note. So we have a little problem with the naming of this right now. It's just called delete note callback, but it shouldn't be. All right. So we're going to utilize that both for delete and also for tapping on an existing note. So let me bring up the caption. Let's rename that delete note callback to just note callback. So I'm going to right click on it. I'm just going to say rename symbol, and let's just call it note callback. Okay. And now you can see it's actually renamed here for me as well. And everything should be working the way it was before. So we don't have to do anything special. It's just called note callback now, all right? Okay, let's move on to the next section now, which is very related. So what we need to do now is, you see at the moment, the nodes list view, it's not handling at all the user tapping on any of these list tiles. And we're going to fix that. So I'm just going to go to my notes and make sure that I have all the information here. So what we need now is just to make sure that the user can tap on those on tap. All right. so sorry, that the user can tap on these list tiles, and then um, we're then going to call a function just like the note callback and tell our owner widget that, hey, the user tapped on one of these, just do whatever you want. So let's go ahead and add a field here and say on tap, sorry, note callback, and we'll just call it on tap. The constructor is not happy now saying that, yeah, you have a final field that you haven't initialized. So let's just add that here right after on delete. And I'm just going to make this required parameter and a comma at the end just to make sure that you get the formatting right as well. We're not using on tap right now. And if you've noticed, we've also broken the notes view. That's okay. We'll get there. We'll fix that soon. The reason we've broken notes view is because we're not passing on tap since it's a required parameter. Okay, we're going to fix this. Luckily, in order to handle taps on a list tile, we don't have to work with gesture recognition or anything like that. But what we could do is just to say on tap, you see it's already there. So there is a function that has no parameters. And what we need to do in here, just to call our own on tap in here, and you can see we have to pass a database node. And luckily, we already have, I believe, a note right here. Okay, so we're just going to say on tap and note. That's it. Okay, so we're doing that now. Now what we need to do is to go back to our notes view and handle that case, you see. So I'm going to go back to our notes view and scroll to the part where we're getting an error and we have on delete, but we don't have the on tap. So I'm going to go to my notes as well. All right. So in here, right after on delete note, let's go and add this on tap functionality in here. And you can see Visual Studio Code is helping me and saying, oh, this function actually accepts a note. So if I move my mouse over it, it already tells me it's a database note. And remember, that's just what the notes list view is giving us, all right? And in here, let's make this function an asynchronous function. And the reason for that is because we're going to actually grab our, let me actually see if we have to make it asynchronous. I don't think it needs to be asynchronous. Let's just not make it asynchronous. I had it as asynchronous in my notes, and I thought that we have to do that. But maybe there's a reason behind it. I don't know yet. But let's just go ahead and not add asynchronous at the moment. So what we need to do in this case is also do something very similar to what we're doing in here. Navigator of blah, blah, push. No, not that one. Sorry. This one. Navigator of context, push name, create or update node route. So it may actually make sense to copy that code and let's go to in on tap and paste that. I'm going to put a comma here so it breaks it down for me. And in here, what we're going to do is just to say arguments and we're going to pass the note there. Okay, so we're just saying that here's a note and go to that screen and pass that argument to it. Then when we go to the create update note view, this function gets called create or get existing note, which in turn tries to grab that argument of type database node from our context using our get argument generic function, which then goes to the model route of that context and then grabs that argument. So it's like 3 layers of extraction, but that's quite fine. Now at least you have a generic function to grab your arguments. Okay, so I'm going to press Command S. It might be good to do a hot reload, a hot restart, just because we've done quite a bit of changing. So I'm going to delete these 2 nodes like that, and then I'm going to press the plus button. Let's just in here, I'm going to say my note number 1. I'm going to go back and then I'm going to press plus and I'm just going to say my note number 2. Now I have my note number 1 and 2 in here. Then I'm now going to test that to see that we can actually go and edit an existing note. All right, so I'm going to go to my note number 1 and tap on it. And now I can see I actually went to our notes and it still says new note. And maybe that's okay. We could just leave it like that. We could update the text maybe later. That's fine. But at least I can see the text. So I'm now going to change actually this my note 1 to my note 3 and go back. And I can see now I have my note 2 and 3. So this is a really good sign because that means that updating an existing note is actually working and we're not creating a new note because otherwise that note would have appeared in this list. So I'm going to go to this new note 3 and then change it to 1 as well. So now you see it gets updated. All right. Perfect. We got updating working and it was quite a breeze, to be honest with you, if you ask me. So Well done. What we need now is to make sure we don't lose our code. So let's go as we usually do at the end of every chapter. We're going to go commit and tag our code. Okay. Going to change the screen layout, and I'm then going to increase the size of the screen so you see what I'm doing a little bit better. Let's go to our terminal, and if you look at, if you look at, I think it's, was it Command K? Yeah. Let's look at our Git log, and you see the last commit that we did was step 16, and also your tags. The last tag was also step 16. Okay, let's go and commit now. As maybe before that, let's have a look at status. Quite a bit has changed. Modified, deleted. It thinks that this file was deleted, though it really wasn't. It was just renamed. So that's unfortunate that it marked it as deleted. That's okay though, but a little bit unfortunate. There are ways of doing that so that Git actually understands that you renamed the file, but I can see that Visual Studio Code wasn't able to actually mark that as renamed, and it just marked, it basically was marked as deleted. But that's okay, we can live with that. So let's just say git add all, and let's just say then git commit step 17. All right. And then we just say git push, so we push all our changes. And let's do a git status to make sure we didn't leave any files behind, and we haven't. So in here, we're then going to say git tag step 17 as well, and push our tags. Okay. So that part is now done. We've done our updating of existing notes, and that's fantastic. So as is tradition for every chapter in this course, we always talk about what we need to work on in the coming chapter. So we have a little bit of a problem in our source code at the moment, and that is inside our node service. So I'm gonna get rid of this bottom bar here and go to node service. And you can see in our node service, we're exposing a functionality here called get all notes. Actually, I don't think we're using this get all notes. We're just using all notes stream. And let's see where that is here, all notes stream. And that is just reading the notes stream controller's stream. And that is coming from here. You can see from our notes. And that notes is being populated inside, let's see, get all notes, remove, we have here. So you see, we are at the moment reading all notes, and we're just exposing them to the outside world. But wait a minute, our application has a concept of users. So if we now log out of the application and log back in with another user, then that new user is going to see my notes, because there is nowhere inside this node service that we have a concept of a user. Like, we're not actually filtering these things out and exposing only relevant data to the user. Okay, so we need to fix that. It's very serious. It's not a bug. It's actually something that I've intentionally left until this point, because yeah, we didn't have to handle that. It was just more fun to work with the UI of the application. But we have to be very conscious about these little things that we haven't implemented. And that's exactly what we're going to do and fix in the next chapter. So I'll see you there.